All right, Randy. Randy, you grew up in LA?
No, I grew up on Long Island in New York.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
What made you want to become a cop?
My dad was a cop.
Mm.
He was a cop for 30 years back in New York on Long Island.
Tell me about your childhood. You had mom and dad?
I had a good childhood. I lived about 9 houses from the Bay, the Great South Bay, and I spent my summer sailing, and it was a great place to grow up. Unfortunately, my dad was a cop for Suffolk County PD, and back in those days, he would work 1 week of day watch, and then next week he'd work 4 to 12, so like PM watch, and the next week he worked like midnights from midnight to 8. Well, when I was 8 and my younger sister was 5 and my youngest sister was 2, my mom died of cancer. So, my dad had to bring us up by himself working that kind of schedule. And, some of the responsibilities of the household fell to me at an early age.
It's hard on the family.
Yeah, and my dad, I love my dad to death. He passed in 2020, but I always knew he had my back. Unfortunately, it was like our relationship was, you're a man, I'm a man, and we're not gonna have deep conversations about your feelings or that kind of thing.
That generation was like that.
Yeah, and he grew up in the South, so it was most exasperated by this kind of Southern machismo kind of thing.
But the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and you became a cop as well.
Yes, yeah.
Was it just seeing your dad doing it that kind of opened your mind to it?
Yeah, absolutely. He always seemed happy going to work. Of course, there was a lot of times where he was tired, and but he always seemed to look forward to it. He tells stories about the guys and, different capers he had, and it was always something different. It wasn't the same thing day after day. It didn't seem like anyway. And to a young man, I was impressed by that.
And you guys moved to LA when?
No, my dad had a couple words of wisdom for me when I was growing up, and one of the things he told me was, hey, go to college if you want to, but I'm telling you, no man ever feels totally satisfied unless he serves his country. That was kind of, I guess I better join the military. So I joined the Navy and was honorably discharged, and came back home to New York for a bit, and I knew I wanted to be a police officer, so I tested for several departments, NYPD and our local departments, Suffolk County and Nassau County. But at the time, in the kind of mid-'80s, mid to late 80s, LAPD had this fantastic reputation back east. They were innovators, they were hard chargers, they were professional. And at the time, NYPD didn't have a great reputation. So I was actually sitting around in a bar one day and was like, I wonder what's going on in LA. So I applied and got accepted and jumped on a plane and came out.
And you were how old?
23.
23. And your career in LA, law enforcement, lasted how long?
30 years.
That's a good ride.
It was.
And tell me what departments, you told me you worked all kinds of different parts of the city.
Yeah, after the academy, I did my probation, which is the first year after the academy where you receive daily ratings by a training officer. You work with senior officers, basically getting to know the job outside of the academy. And so my first year was spent after the academy in Van Nuys Division. I was then, after that first year, you're automatically wheeled to a different division. So I was wheeled to Hollywood division. Got a chance to work patrol there and Vice, the prostitution enforcement detail there as well. But when I came out to LA, I had this kind of vision. It was the lethal weapon vision. I was going to be an undercover cop and grow my hair out and do that whole thing. That's what I envisioned. I'm in the academy and there's a day where officers from Metropolitan Division come in and train you. Now, Metropolitan Division, consists of a couple line platoons, SWAT, K-9, the mounted unit, and these guys came in and they were all in shape, and they had take-home cars. They had partners that they were partners with for years on end. Their uniforms were impeccable, and I was like, that's what I wanted to do.
It's the dream.
That's it. From then on, my whole career was, I'm going to Metro. That's where I want to go.
And you did.
Eventually, yeah. Eventually, I did. I was, like I said, after probation in Van Nuys, I was wheeled to Hollywood. But back in at that time, the rumor was that you had to work a really hot division to get to Metro, or it would help you get to Metro. So one of the busiest divisions was 77th in South LA, and I was working this great unit in Hollywood where we got a lot of perks. It was not too difficult, not too dangerous, and I remember putting in my paperwork for 77th. It was dangerous and was busy.
Yeah, there's certain parts of LA that I imagine are just
pretty
easy, and then there's the South Central, which is what you're talking about.
Especially in that time period, early 90s.
The gangs were at their
peak, We had a year in 77th and 77th is 11 square miles, and we had 137, I think it was 137 homicides in 1 year in that 11 square mile area. But I wanted to go to Metro, and the word on the street was, if you want to go to Metro, you got to work one of those divisions. So I put my paperwork in, and my buddies working at Hollywood Ped were like, what are you doing, man? We got a great gig here. And I was like, no, I want to go to Metro. And so that's what I did.
How long were you in South LA?
I worked patrol there for a couple of years, and then the gang unit, which back then was called Crash, they asked me to come over and work gangs in 77th Division, and I jumped at the chance.
How was that? Tell me about that.
Oh, well, back then the unit consisted of about 8 to 10 officers and a sergeant. Now they have like 30 officers and 2 sergeants, I believe. But back then, 93, 94, there was just 8 to 10 of us. And we were each assigned a certain gang. And our usual operating procedure was, each car was assigned, a certain amount of gangs. Some Hoover sets, or some Blood sets, or on the West Side, the Rolling 60s, or each car had a certain amount of gangs. So the first half of the shift, you'd go out and you'd look at your neighborhoods, look at your gangs, see if they're busy, if they're active, if parties going on. If you saw a couple of gangsters, you jack them up, get to know them, talk to them. And then we'd get together about halfway through the shift, and if there was a lot of activity over in a certain gang neighborhood, we would just hit that neighborhood, kind of, even with 4 or 5 cars, we'd kind of create a perimeter around whatever house or area where the gang was active, and we just saturate the area and stop the gang members and
neutralize whatever was.
Yeah, jack them up, get to know them. Our main focus working gangs was to gather intelligence. So if there was a gang homicide, the homicide detectives could come to the gang officers and say, okay, who's warring, which sets or gangs are at war, who are the shooters in these gangs, and we had to know.
What kind of relationship do you have with the gang members?
It all depends. I mean, every officer is an individual, and just like every gang member is an individual. And maybe because of being brought up in a cop household, I kind of knew that to be respectful to the point where either that respect was returned or it wasn't. If the respect was returned, then we could have a conversation. If the respect was not returned, it was a different story.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the problem is? Why are gangs so strong in that part of town?
It was my experience, and it's I think you can look at it almost historically. When you're in a situation, when families are in a situation where both parents are forced to work, or one parent is absent, or the kids are living with the grandparents, you look for that feeling of belonging. You look for that family that doesn't exist in your household. I mean, I to a certain extent, I did, without a mom in my house, and even though my dad was fantastic, I looked for something bigger to serve, I looked for that family. I found it in the military, and I found it in LAPD. And I think, number one, there are so many, especially Hispanic gangs that are, 100 years old, so it's generational. You're born into it a lot of times. But other times, you're the young man or young woman is looking for that family unit that's not present in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a problem that's beyond a police department's ability to solve.
Right. Yeah, but I think as humans, we're pack animals.
Absolutely.
And your family is your little pack. And when the family falls apart, the gang.
They're more than willing to step in and be that surrogate family, because, the more, the OGs, the original gangsters, those older cats, I'm sure some of them had good intent, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them looked at these youngsters and were like, these are potential. Not only were they potential, gang members as they progressed through the gang subculture, but they would use juveniles for certain crimes, knowing that a juvenile wouldn't face the same penalty as an adult would.
What kind of activities were the gangs? They're looking to make money. What were they doing? Drugs?
Yeah, I would say, in my experience, their main income stream was the sales of illegal narcotics. They would do, robberies, street robberies, commercial robberies, and then it kind of, in the gang subculture, it seemed to me that there was always an evolution, and some gangs evolved faster than others. But part of a general evolution was they realized that doing burglaries could net them almost the same profit as a robbery with much less, sentence, much less time they'd have to serve if they got caught. So they kind of, in my experience, they kind of evolved into doing a lot more burglaries than, straight up gun in your face robbery.
Because the time is, the risk is less.
Risk is less, and the reward is usually, pretty equal.
Mm-hmm. Was Figueroa Street a big thing back then?
For prostitution, yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've seen how the cops just kind of roll by. Sometimes just their presence slows things down, but they don't really do a tremendous amount of arresting there.
No, Vice, to get those actual violations, it's almost impossible for a uniformed car, two uniformed officers in a black and white vehicle, to get, lewd conduct violation or a solicitation. The best you could do is, see the prostitutes interacting with potential customers, make a stop, check them for wants and warrants, and hopefully, get them off the street by a warrant that they have that's outstanding. But in the uniform, that's about the best you can do.
No one's going to get arrested for prostitution.
Then not unless there's a sting, unless you put officers in the position of acting like prostitutes and being solicited by potential customers. It's really difficult, and to get the prostitutes to testify against their Johns, the guys that put them on the street, demand
the pimps.
The pimps rather. I'm sorry, their pimps, who demand, a portion of their earnings, keep them in line, usually by physical violence, supply them with drugs, to get that prostitute to testify against her or his pimp is extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me so many families in that subculture are strapped. They're just scrambling to survive. And that's why the prostitution becomes a hustle.
Oh, absolutely.
Selling drugs, prostitution, burglary, whatever. These are all just hustles that will help them survive. I got to refer back to my dad on this because he told me before I left for LA, and this will tie into your analysis. Before I left for LA, my dad said, "You're going to go to neighborhoods, time and time again, and respond to the same kind of BS, the same kind of crimes, the same kind of shit, time after time. Pretty soon, you're going to say, this is a shit neighborhood." Just like Figueroa, you drive up and down Figueroa and you see the prostitutes, you see the pimps, you see the Johns, and you say, this is shit area. He told me before I left for LA, when you start thinking that way, you look at every house that you've never gone to, every family that's just trying to make it. I swear to God, it's a third-year cop, came on the job in 1963, hardcore guy, tough guy, and he told me, when you start having those thoughts in your mind, like this is a shit neighborhood, everyone that lives here is a criminal and is shit, you look at the houses that you never go to, and you realize that those are just families that are trying to raise their kids and live their life the best they can. Honestly. Yeah, without being criminals.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Figueroa Street it's all going on in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah. All those side streets and even along Figueroa Boulevard, they're just, apartments and houses, people trying to live their lives.
It's crazy that it exists and thrives, really.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's 24/7.
Literally. And then you worked other parts of town?
Yeah, after my time in the gang unit and Crash, I was promoted to a training officer in 77th Division. So I was given that probation. I was just out of the academy. And, part of my responsibility was to train them, in police work, basic patrol. But I still had that, I want to go to Metro, mindset. So when the chance came up, and to get into Metro is, there's a process. You have to take a physical test, running, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups. There's a background investigation. Metro officers will go to your, current Metro officers will go to your division of assignment, talk to your supervisors, talk to your peers. Is this man or woman a hard worker? Do they show up late? Do they follow directions? Can they be trusted to, work independently? So they do that background investigation, and then you have to sit in front of a 3 sergeant interview board, which they made nerve-wracking, to say the least.
Mm. Wow. But what are some of the most memorable cases you worked on? We well, in Metropolitan Division, it's kind of set up differently than regular patrol. The division is broken up into platoons. Like SWAT is a platoon, a D platoon. The mounted unit is E platoon. Canine, canine platoons, their own platoon, and then you have the line platoons. Like I said, I worked the line platoons, and our bread and butter was crime suppression, just going out there, not answering radio calls, and just doing what we called observation work, seeing the dope deals go down, seeing the gang members rolling around, taking proactive measures, to combat whatever crime is going on in the area. So I went to Metropolitan Division, and I spent about 2 years as just a P3, basically true stripes, and after that, I was made a P3 plus 1, which is kind of a senior officer. And another unique aspect of Metropolitan Division is you had a sergeant that's in charge of each squad within the platoon. And then you had two or three plus ones that were in charge of, your car and maybe another car, another 2 cars. But when a detail came down, any time a head of state, whether it was foreign or domestic, or a candidate would come down, we would work, hand in hand with the Secret Service to set up the protection detail. And it wasn't the sergeant doing that at the time. It was the plus 1, the senior officer, that would put everything together. If it was stakeout, it was a plus 1 that put everything together. So I had, back in 1996, that was when LA was the bank robbery capital of the country, and so the San Fernando Valley was getting hit. Just
daily,
and so I'm 2 months into Metro. I'm a brand new guy, and we have 2 plainclothes officers in a bank. And like the manager had a second row office that had a glass front that looked down on the floor of the bank. I was part of the team that would respond if the bank was hit. We were in plain clothes, in our plain cars, secreted in a parking garage, away from the location, about 4 or 5 cars, buildings down from the location. And we get there early, and there was it's in the valley. It's along Ventura Boulevard around Winnetka, and we were on the north side. The bank was on the north side, and we were hidden on the north side. Our response team was hidden. On the south side, there's this big school, this big elementary school, or junior high school, elementary school, and about 9 o'clock in the morning, there's a bomb scare there. So, the world is there. Police are there, fire are there. They evacuate the school. It's just bedlam, And me being the stupid new guy, I'm like, nothing's going to happen here. And I kick my chair back, and I'm just kind of, kicking back in my chair. And then all of a sudden, the guys inside the bank said, put out a code red, which means our bank is getting hit. I was literally close to, nodding off. And all of a sudden, it went, 2 hours after this bomb scare, and all this, all the fire department, 2 hours after they left, our bank gets hit. So we pull out, and we're heading kind of in a line towards this bank. And it was, about 11 o'clock in the morning, I would guess. And we all had shotguns. And I remember seeing the getaway car and seeing the getaway driver and coming up with my shotgun and looking at this driver, and just as cool as a cucumber, he puts the car in drive and makes a U-turn and drives slowly the other way. Well, the guys are still in the bank, and our officers that are in the bank that are watching are still broadcasting. Okay, they're starting to pistol whip tellers, and they're taking the CD out of the ATM. The CD was the box where all the cash was kept, so they're trying to get that out.
And the bank entrance was reset, so we couldn't see it from the street. But as we approached, we hear on the radio, all right, they're exiting the bank, and one guy, well, the first guy, because there was 4 altogether, the first guy comes out, and he just breaches a doorway, and we're coming from west to east, so we're walking now, almost in the skirmish line, down the sidewalk, and this cat comes out, and he looks at us, and points a gun, and we open up. And I remember, it's funny because you go through all this firearms training, and one of the things they teach you is front sight. Always look for that front sight. That's where you put your target. And I remember coming up, and this is common where you have these kind of thoughts. I came up to get on target, and I saw the front sight, and I was so happy. I was like, damn, I see the front sight. My training's kicking in. I put the front sight on the guy, and I'm squeezing. Well, he sees us, and he backs in the corner. And as soon as I let my shot off, he had backed into the walkway, and my shot hit the side of the building. So these guys now are running, and the bank sat, like I said, on the north side of Ventura Boulevard. So just north of that was the 101 freeway, and it's 11 o'clock, during a weekday. So it's a sea of cars going north and south, and we're clearing this, complex where this bank was located, and we get to the back, and I look over this chain link fence at the 101 freeway, and I was like, there is no way those guys ran across that freeway. There was no screeching of tires. There was, no braking, no accidents, no nothing. So I was like, and I was a junior officer, of course, the senior officers were the same mindset. We were all like, they're here on this side. They're on the south side of the 101 freeway between Ventura and the 101. So we had the whole division, sitting on different banks, and we called everybody in, and we, set up this huge perimeter on the south side of the 101 freeway, and we started canine search, and we search. We were taken out of the scene because we were the shooters. Once you're involved in off shooting, as soon as the scene is fairly secure, you're taken to, usually a police station, and you're separated, so you can't. What they say is, you can't talk to each other and come up with a story. You're separated until you're interviewed by the RHD, robbery homicide detectives. So we're off, at West Valley Station, but we're hearing what's going on, and they search the whole south side of the freeway, and they get, Metropolitan is like, screw it, they're not here. Let's move it to the north side of the freeway. So they establish another perimeter on the north side of the 101 freeway, and they do a canine search, and they search, and they can't find them. About 2 weeks later, we get this through the grapevine. A family calls up from that area and said, hey, we've been on vacation for the past 2 weeks. And the strangest thing, someone broke into our house, but they didn't really take anything. It looked like they shaved, and maybe some of our clothes were missing, but, someone in the detectives put 2 and 2 together. What these suspects did is, after running across the 101 freeway carrying these heavy CDs full of cash, they found a house that was vacant, broke in, and just waited us out. Took showers, shaved, changed their clothes, and just waited and waited and waited. They were eventually identified and caught, but that was my introduction to Metro. But one of the things that recently, because I don't think about the job all that much. I've been retired for 5 years now, and I don't have nightmares. I don't relive incidents. But when President Trump when they attempted to assassinate him a second time when he was hit in the ear, I looked at that scene, and I looked at that whole incident, and I was like,
man, that was one big cluster. That was just from the news reports. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. And we had a certain relationship with the Secret Service because, a lot of these small departments aren't afforded the same amount of training that Metropolitan Division was, and they don't have the interaction with the Secret Service that we do, because there's pretty regularly a head of state will come to LA or a president will come and visit. So when I saw that scene and what had happened, I was like, oh, this was screwed from the beginning. And it brought me back. Now I've spent a couple of years as a plus one, and I've worked, guarding presidents, guarding, candidates, guarding heads of state. It was as a plus one, I was in charge of that. The sergeant was there to back me up and back my play, but I put the plan together as a plus one. And we worked with Secret Service, and this other plus one and I, we put together a training day with the Secret Service and with LAPD, and we had this great training day. They brought, a whole bunch of really cool simulated guns and simulated grenades and smoke, and it was a really good training day. But after that, the assistant Secret Service in charge of the LA office said, we want to send, they want to send me and this other plus one back to Beltsfield, I think it's Georgia, where they train, and we want you to come up with protocol that we can give to these smaller departments so that, they have a better idea, of what to do when dealing with the Secret Service. And, this other plus one was a good friend of mine, and I were like, yeah, this is going to be fantastic. We could do something really good here. And we were excited about the opportunity. My lieutenant got word that the Secret Service wanted us to go back there and do that. And he said, that's not a job for police officers. I should go as a lieutenant, and establish these protocols. And so at the time, Metropolitan came up with what they called as this steering committee, which was basically all the sergeants and lieutenants from the division and me and this other police officer. And we discussed some stuff. It was all bullshit. They canked the whole thing. They were like, the lieutenant was like, well, if I can't go, I'm not sending these guys. And we had the opportunity to really impact these small departments that don't have the experience, but give them something to work with the Secret Service. I mean, I looked at the Trump assassination attempt, and I was like, if that was my detail and the Secret Service left that rooftop uncovered, I would have been like, guys, I would have taken two of my guys, get your rifles, get your tack gear, get on that roof, it was that got to me. That kind of got to me.
What is your now that you're out of the police department? What is your view of police in general or LAPD?
It's after getting out, some of the craziest rhetoric that I heard, from different groups was defund the police, defund the police. Don't, and basically what they're saying, because the first thing when you defund a police department, the first thing that they're going to defund is the police department's training. A police department will put money to have officers on the street, but the first thing they're going to cut is training. Training is what separates, Navy SEALs from, a grunt. I mean, it's all about training, and what we need is more training. What we need is officers be, trained on not only to how to de-escalate, but I mean, I think, still LAPD, because that's what I can speak to, still does a really good job of dealing with people, but we can always get better,
It's a hard job.
It's a hard job, and one of the hardest things about it is taking it personally. You know, when I became a supervisor, what I tried to instill, and I never, I mean, not that I never, I failed in this at times in my career where I did take it personally. But one of the things that I tried to instill in my officers that were working for me was it's not personal. You're a uniform. You represent, you know, not, you know, John Smith. You represent that uniform. So don't take it personally, because that leads to anger, you know, and, you know, this whole idea that, you know, cut back on training is absolutely the worst way to go. You want to see an increase in excessive use of forces and bad shootings and bad pursuits, stop training officers how to do those things.
Back to South Central LA, it seems like it's almost like a unanimous view of the police department as just, they have a really negative view of cops.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a large vocal section that has a negative view on the police, and I can understand it. You know, I mean,
but that's the most crime-ridden part of the town too. So
yeah, it's you know, it's the most, you know, crime-ridden you know, part of the city, and there's a historical component too. You know, I mean, you know, people, you know, they don't forget about the riots in the 90s or the riots in the 60s even, you know. I mean, they understand that. And I think there's still this view that we're almost an occupying force, you know, down there. Because given at the time that I was on, there was never more than 350 officers on the street working the whole city. The whole city, 350 officers. I mean, that's from, you know, north in the valley to the harbor. And so just logistically, we were forced to be deployed in cars. We were forced to, you know, go from radio call to radio call in a car. Well, that cuts back on the human interaction that you have, you know. It's not the cop walking the beat, getting to know people firsthand. And, you know, I know this is an old story and this has been preached. But because we were operating with so few officers, and I understand we're operating with less now, that human interaction, that understanding that comes with communication is lacking.
Yeah.
You know, and
it can go a long way if you have that kind of relationship with.
Absolutely.
With the public.
Absolutely. And you know, and like I said, if I could take anything, and pass it to the new generation or the generations that came after me that are working the streets now, is that lesson my dad taught me. Just because you go to a neighborhood and you go time and time again, when you start thinking that way, you look at the houses that you've never been to and you realize those are just families trying to do the best they can. Now, there are predators out there and bad people. Mm-hmm. And you have to be ready to deal with them as well.
Were you around for the Rodney King riots?
Oh, yeah. Of course, sorry, but, you know, like gallows humor. I was working that night. I was working in Hollywood, actually, and I was working patrol. And my partner and I got into use of force. It's domestic violence. This guy beat up his living girlfriend, and we go in there to arrest him, and he wants to fight. So we fight this guy, but we take him into custody, and it wasn't a big deal. We book him, and this is all while Rodney King. I had no idea that was going on in Foothill, because at the time it was just another pursuit, you know, and use of force at the end of a pursuit. I go home and I go to bed, and about 10 o'clock in the morning, my dad calls me up and wakes me from, you know, a dead sleep, and he was like, "What the fuck are you guys doing out there?" And I think he's talking about, you know, the use of force that I had. And I go, "Dad, did you see that on TV?" And he was like, "Yeah, I saw it on TV." I go, "I was in a small apartment. How did you see it on TV?" He's like, no, up in Foothill Division, the end of the pursuit. And, the guy that got, hit with the batons. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So then I turned on the TV and I saw. But the thing about, obviously, I like to think that as an officer, as a supervisor, I would have handled that differently. But what really got me upset was I had seen for weeks and weeks, probably a month, the beating of Rodney King. Him on the ground after being tased, and those officers, smacking him with their batons. It wasn't until at least a month later when I saw the whole video and I saw Rodney King charge the officers and got information that there's 2 other occupants in the vehicle that complied and got on the ground and weren't touched. Now, that doesn't say that use of force was a good use of force. They were proficient and, that I agreed with how they handled their business, because I don't. But my philosophy has always been, when it comes to use of force, and some people are going to agree with it, and other people aren't going to agree with it. And another thing my dad taught me was like, if you let someone throw the first punch, you're a dummy. You think someone's going to hit you, you hit them first. And after spending time on the department, and I started out wrestling, and then I got into boxing, and I've been doing some kind of fighting skill. I still box, but my philosophy was the shorter the use of force, the better, because that means, and I'm not talking about crazy, smack a guy in the head with a baton, put him down kind of use of force. Sometimes that's justified, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about training our officers to be proficient in use of force, because the longer use of force goes on, the worse it looks. And we all know now everything's on film. But the longer it goes on, the worse it looks, and the more danger it is to not only the suspect, but the officer. So, if you braced up on me, it was on. I wasn't going to wait for you to take a swing. I wasn't going to wait. No. You can go on the computer and look up pre-attack indicators, and it'll give you some pretty good idea about, the human body, and when that stress of a pre-fight or a pre-altercation, that adrenaline and all those, hit your body, there are certain, reactions that you just can't help. You're clenching your feet, if you're looking around, your pupils dilate, you start sweating, you start shuffling your feet. Maybe you're standing straight onto me and now you're bladed. As a fighter, and I know what that means, so you raise your hand. I'm not waiting for that swing to come. And I didn't when I was a police officer, and I wouldn't today. So when I see the ineffectual use of a baton in the Rodney King incident, it kind of illustrates my point. That went on way too long because they were ineffectual strikes. They should have just, he was a big guy, but jump on the guy. You got enough people there, but, I wasn't there, so I'm kind of, I don't want to comment too much on, but it appeared to be that those baton blows were ineffective, and like I said, it went way too long, looked way too bad, and it should have been handled with a lot more professional.
Is the stress of the job an underestimated problem in cops' lives? It's got to be, right?
Well, after 2 divorces and 3 trips to rehab, yeah.
It's got to be a super stressful job.
Well, it's insidious because it's stressful, but I mean, I know personally, I love that adrenaline rush, you know.
Are you an adrenaline junkie?
I think I've calmed down from that. I think, at
You
one point.
kind of have to be to do that job.
Yeah, I mean, I went out every night when I was in a car and I was on the hunt. I really didn't care about tickets. You know, I would respond to radio calls if I was assigned to them. In Metro, we weren't assigned to them, so you know, for those years that I worked Metro, every night I was hunting. You know, and you know, sometimes you're tired, sometimes you've been in court all day, and now you're working all night, but you still feel that pump, you know, that. So it's not till later, I can honestly say, and not because I'm, you know, brave or you know, some guy, it's not that, but I can't remember a lot of times where during an incident I was scared. Afterwards, and thinking about it afterwards, I was like, holy shit, and that could have really went bad, you know. And I think the stress is insidious because it isn't as apparent, and it manifests itself in different ways. For me, it was drinking, it was infidelity, it was, that's the truth.
Does the media help or hurt cops do their job in a city like LA?
Well,
because what I see is that like news channels are trying to sell advertising. That is their business.
Absolutely.
So by making a story bigger and prolonging it or making it sound worse than it is, they do their job of selling more advertising.
Yeah. I mean, we all wish for the Walter Cronkite days, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, and there was absolutely some cops that wanted nothing to do with the media and wanted, you know, were like, oh, they're all against us, and I felt that way at times, absolutely. You know, I was like, oh, come on, you know, this is you're sensationalizing this. You know, this is not front page. You know, I mean, an officer dies and it's you know, tucked somewhere in the back. You know, I mean, but the way the media makes police work difficult, in my mind, is that sensationalism. It's what people read. So now you're feeding the public. Yeah, you know, I've been called everything in a book. You can't call me anything that I've never been called. And, you know, that doesn't affect most cops. But what it does affect is how the public looks at us. And that becomes a problem, you know, when you're looking for witnesses, when you're looking for information, when you're just trying to deal with a domestic violence situation, and, you know, they're like, we know you, we know who you fuckers are. You guys, you know, you all hate, you know, us or them, or, you know, that's when it becomes a real detriment, you know, when the public feeds into it.
How do you think your decades on the job have changed you as a man?
Well, like I said, after 2 divorces, my bank account wasn't what it was. But I can honestly say, and this isn't just from the police department, but I've kind of shed a lot of pre-existing notions that I've had. And I'm not talking about, you know, race or sexual orientation or religion, or none of the typical things that you would, you know, label someone a racist if you feel that way. What I've been able to shed is like the idea of basic humanity, you know, like I'm not as quick to judge someone that's homeless as lazy. I'm not as quick to judge when I hear that, you know, the booming stereo is, oh, that's a carload of gangsters. Where in the past, I'd be like, that's a good stop. You know, I'm not as quick to label people off this lack of information. You know, It really, I mean, I don't know if you want to, mention it, but like my relationship with Renee is a perfect example,
Rene Enriquez,
Renee
Mexican Mafia.
Yeah, former Mexican Mafia.
You worked with him years ago, right?
I worked with, the first time I worked with him was years ago, but last 4th of July, he was like, hey, I'm having a party. You want to come to my 4th of July party? We still talk on the phone. We still, he just told me about his new podcast and his new book. And, but it's kind of like, it shows, it's in my world, in my vision of the world, it kind of shows redemption on both parts, and the ability to understand, if you're willing, to understand, people are people, my journey has certainly been fraught with mistakes and regrets and misconceptions and a victory here and there, but that kind of shift in mindset, it's in like police work. When you go to stop somebody, we were taught, you don't know what this cat did 5 minutes ago. He could have just blown someone's head off. So be wary, be on guard every time you stop somebody, because you don't know what he was doing 5 minutes ago. It's the same thing if you see a homeless person. You don't know where he was 20 years ago. You don't know, what brought him to this position, so why judge so quickly, if it's not life or death, why make that judgment?
Right. Yeah, you've seen a lot as a cop. Randy, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
I think, God bless. I think acceptance, and I don't just mean that in, like the topic we were just talking about, like accepting people as human beings, no matter who they are, no matter what situation they're in, no matter what, we're all human beings. Beyond that, acceptance that, because I was, I don't know, it was by nature or by circumstance, but I became a control freak. I wanted to control. It was my job, basically. My job as a police officer was come into a chaotic situation and unfuck it, and calm the chaos. You couldn't leave a radio call without being resolved in some shape, way, fashion. It's got to be resolved, and after I left the department and after I took certain journeys, I realized, man, there's very little I can control. I can control me, and that's it. I have 3 fantastic daughters that are they're all, 2 are in college and one's a writer for CNN, and I still want to be dad, but as they grow, I know I have less and less control. Now they're adults. Now I can support them, but I can't control them. I can't.
Life goes on. All right. Randy Holcomb, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoy your retirement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.